Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, I guess. Welcome to the 5th installment of the summer camp series. Hope your summer is going well and safe. It's hard to believe that it is coasting already well into August. In keeping with the spirit of what we intend to do here at this camp is to open a dialogue around compelling themes where healthcare and AI and technology meet in interesting spaces. Today, we have a tremendous conversation of seasoned experts talking about radiology and enterprise imaging, understanding kind of what is that special sauce of intersection of how technology can enable both image acquisition, image selection, image insights, but also workflow. How do we drive value and ultimately deliver better care for patients and better experiences for those who are providing those services? Without further ado, would love to quickly establish our camp rules around the fire. We will be recording this, and so the intent is this is educational. We're going to be capturing this and then posting it online to share. Please pin the speakers. You'll see our obnoxious backgrounds in the back, campy, but intended to highlight the two speakers, not necessarily me, but the two experts. So pin them. If you do notice you're off mute, we will try to put you on mute, but please try to keep those background chatters, or at least mute your lines. Use the Q&A. You can actually use the chat, but we actually like the Q&A function better. We're going to, throughout the conversation, try to go to those questions to make it more of a didactic, interactive than a Socratic kind of lecture series. So please, the more you ask questions, the less that you have to hear from me. And without further ado, let's go and meet our two speakers today. Again, radiology in this unbelievable intersection of health, AI, and patient care. Dr. Gurson is a compulsive entrepreneur and the co-founder and CEO of RadAI, and I'll have him outline a little bit about his journey and moreover the space in which his company is transforming. And Jason Klotzer is a longtime partner in crime here within Google. He is a expert in all things radiology, was on the other side of the house working for large enterprise imaging software solutions, and then came over and joined Google. And so he, in his capacity, will be speaking about kind of where he sees this, tremendous influx of capabilities in computer science, and then how that impacts and empowers folks like Doktor. So, Doctor, I wonder if you could actually kind of kick us off a little bit. I think radiology has always been the darling child example. To me, it's like the airline comparison of patient safety when we think about healthcare and AI. And I wonder if you could kind of take a step back and kind of explain to the audience, because knowing we have both technology experts, we got workflow, we got computer science, we may have some clinicians, kind of what is the whole lay of the land when you think about radiology or any imaging modality in AI? Give us a kind of a framework or a reference.
Yeah, I think so. As we've thought about this, one of the things that we noticed early on, and just to give you a little bit of context here, where the domain expertise matters a lot. So my co-founder, Jeff, is a radiologist. And so one of the things that we realized very early on here is that, you know, AI for the sake of AI is not all that useful. In fact, I know there are engineers on the call, and I consider myself sort of an engineer light because I've done a lot of software engineering. But oftentimes what I would see in the early days, I would see folks who are interested in solving an engineering problem, but they don't necessarily understand how it fits into radiology. And that was sort of a common theme that we kept seeing. And oftentimes when we asked radiologists what they wanted to see, I think part of it was that they had a hard time sort of imagining what they could do if they didn't fully understand the capabilities of AI. So it really almost took someone like my co-founder Jeff at the time, who understood AI as well as radiology, to be able to bridge that gap. And so that was one of the reasons why, we sort of intuitively knew from his experience that being able to interpret an image by itself without creating the report was not all that useful. And so we wanted to focus more on the non-interpretive pieces where we knew radiologists were spending the majority of their time. And so as we looked at this closer and closer, I think some of this is timing and luck. Obviously, I know this is my fifth startup, and I'd be remiss if not to mention that luck plays a big part in startups being successful, and really any company being successful. And so some of this was sort of the intersection of when Transformers got kicked off and all that. So happy to elaborate further. There's a lot more I can talk about there, but hopefully, kind of just gives you a sense of where RadAI has been focused is on the non-interpretive parts of radiology. So we've been focused more on how do we increase efficiency and accuracy for radiologists on the non-interpretive, more the workflow side of it.
Got it. No, I think it's really kind of important. I think people, including myself as a hospitalist, we over-index and kind of focus in on, I've got a chest X-ray, the magical AI bot is going to show us the ditzel, and mission accomplished, mic drop and walk away. But 99% of the actual workflow is it's the mundane, I have to say. It's kind of like clinical documentation. Yay, the expert physician dropped the ordered the right test, ordered the esoteric, next generation sequencing lab. But if you didn't document it, then you kind of missed the boat. So you're focusing it on that, and help us kind of understand what has changed, because we hear a lot about ambient speech, and certainly radiologists have been using ambient speech, but what is different, and where do you see this brave new world?
It's a great question. So and just to take you back a bit in time, so when we started RadAI back in 2018, we became one of the first companies in healthcare, and I'd say almost for sure the first company in radiology to start using Gen AI. So this is back in 2018. The Transformer papers came out in 2017. We started our work very shortly thereafter. And what we found was that we went to our initial radiology group where my co-founder Jeff had been practicing as a radiologist. We went there and we had a list of a dozen ideas that we thought were interesting products that we could work on where we thought it could have an impact in the radiologists' lives and kind of make their lives easier. But of the 12 things on that list, we had triaging. We even had what was at the time sort of a almost like a cheerleader, or like someone that would pop onto the screen and just say, "Good job." And believe it or not, that idea was also even something that they thought was interesting, because it's a hard job, right? You're by yourself in a room all day oftentimes, and just hearing "good job" once in a while is kind of a nice thing. So we went through this list of a dozen or so ideas, and oftentimes where we got stuck was when we said, well, how much would you be willing to pay for this? Because at the end of the day, we did have to create some kind of business that could sustain itself. And so when we said, how much would you pay for this? That's oftentimes where things got complicated, and they would say, oh, you want us to pay for this? Well, that's, a little bit more of a tricky question. And the thing on that list for us at the time, where there was no confusion about their willingness to pay for it, was automating impressions. We said, if we can automate impressions, what would you pay for that? And all of a sudden, the conversation changed, because it went from, this is like sort of a nice to have, to, well, if you can increase the efficiency and accuracy and all of these other elements, especially efficiency, that meant that you could essentially read more studies potentially, or radiologists would be less burnt out, quality up. There are lots of benefits to that we can get into. But that was the one that was clear that they'd be willing to pay for. But the question mark there was that we didn't know whether or not we could actually build it, because it did seem like black magic. I know now ChatGPT, everyone's kind of familiar with Gen AI. It seems pretty easy and magical. But back then, when we first tried this out, it was not that easy. In fact, it took us about 2 years to build the first iteration of it. And when my co-founder, Jeff, finally felt like, okay, it was good, he was using it, and it felt like, all right, we're ready to release it to other radiologists. And, we were all excited. We're high-fiving. We're like, this is the moment we've been waiting for. In the first week, we launched it to 5 radiologists, and we churned 4 of those radiologists in the first week of the 5. And the 5th one only used it, I think, because he felt bad for my co-founder, Jeff, because they were friends as well. And so it's not like the best sort of beginning to a product, because it felt like this is going to be impossible. There are just so many edge cases. Every radiologist had a different sort of style that they wanted the impression to be in, and some dictate in different ways. And so we were really trying to figure out how to solve this. And it was just, I think part of it, we just didn't give up. We just kept going, and we're like, well, what other things can we solve for you to start using it? And just like one thing after another. And over time, not only did we win over all 5 of those RADs, but now we have, now we're contracted with roughly 40% of the US radiology market. So there are lots of RADs using it. We're generating, tens of millions of radiology reports. So it's just such an amazing thing to see where we started back then and what we've been able to accomplish in a short amount of time. But I think, it is not something that is lost on me that it wasn't easy. These are all the things I think sometimes you read about startups and it seems like an overnight success, right? But the reality is there are so many ups and downs along the way. And so for us, it was really figuring out what are the end users, the radiologists, like what do we need to do to make their lives better, easier? And once radiologists really started to appreciate the work that we're doing, things got better and easier from there. And I could talk a little bit more. I can go on a lot about that piece of it, because I think for us, one of the reasons we succeeded is because it is more of this like radiologist and patient first approach that we've always taken. And the fact that we have not just my co-founder, Jeff, who's a radiologist, and kind of a side note about him that's an interesting fact is he also became the youngest radiologist in US history. So med school at the age of 16, then went off, got an MBA. By the time we met, he was doing graduate work in AI. So somebody that understands AI as well as radiology, kind of like that, the intersection, which was important. But in addition to that, we also brought on other great folks on our executive team. We have 3 full-time radiologists who are executives at RadAI, which help us really drive the vision, and not just for the products, but just like sort of the culture of the company is driven by that as well. It's important to have physicians in the loop.
No, there are so many relevant kind of pearls and nuggets, I think, for any entrepreneur or startup who is listening in, do development where the work is performed. That kind of intersection, iteration, I think is truly where transformation kind of happens, as opposed to kind of the magical lore of the iPad, right? No one wanted it, but great. But that is a complete, purple unicorn. I love that kind of relentlessness and scope creep. Jason, so I'll put you on the hot spot because you have you're part of a large Google Cloud, very kind of thinking horizontal solutions. And here, Doktor kind of articulated the need for the esoteric, right? Those edge cases, scope creep. How do you think about kind of building state of the art capabilities around imaging or documentation capabilities for radiologists, and then how do you kind of prevent yourself from building too close to the edge and then handing it over to truly the experts who are very, very kind of proximal to the end user?
So we're starting with a simple question. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could talk about,
I thought I was going to get a softball, but it's all good. So, it's very similar to the conversation that doctor was going through around kind of the merging of technology and clinical impact and clinical understanding. The RadAI situation is honestly perfect with respect to a software development organization targeting radiology, frankly. So, on the Google Cloud side and the Google side, we naturally want to seek out these kind of organizations because they're the ones who fully understand, what is needed within that operational complexity, within that, quality of care kind of domain, and see how we can work together, first of all. And then whatever we can do minimally from the infrastructure monetization side, on the AI side, being able to accelerate these type of things. Naturally, being Google, we focus on really big problems, and really big data is absolutely synonymous with medical imaging. So we just try to see where we can provide that sort of API abstraction layer to allow our partners like RadAI to be able to benefit. And then effectively, or implicitly, I should say, the domain will benefit from that, being able to operationalize in a much more streamlined way, much more, 2024 kind of way. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
And so while, so RadAI kind of tackles this space in a really, really interesting way. I think, it's different than what I hear tossed around when I hear about, radiology and imaging, going after the impression aspect. But yet there is an aspect of, gosh, if you were able to understand that image and assist, or at least understand what you see, that could facilitate a better, more comprehensive, I don't want to say accurate, but supported relevant images. And so like there is a then. And doctor, do you kind of see that as a natural progression of kind of start with the end state and then kind of slowly migrate into how do I make it automagical? I hate that word. That you just do your work and the exhaust is that impression.
It's a great question. So I think when we started with impressions, it sort of seemed like the obvious thing that we wanted to solve and get right. And it felt like the technology was at a point where that is where it was most useful. But over time, what we found is that we've built a lot of trust and credibility with radiologists and our partners. And so we've sort of ventured into other parts of this. And so last year, we announced our product, RadAI Reporting, which is essentially a full reporting platform. And as part of that reporting platform, we wanted to take all the great Gen AI expertise we had from building automated impressions and start to apply them to more and more parts of the radiology report. And so what I mean by that is that with our new radiology reporting platform, it becomes much more of an intent-driven workflow. So rather than the radiologist having to worry about what field they're in, they can simply dictate out what they're seeing in the image, and it will automatically start to structure and organize the report. And what's beautiful about it is, and this is something that, it's funny, my co-founder and I had a lot of debates about this in the early days, whether or not it should be the report should be customized to the radiologist, or if it should be standard sort of output, whatever should be sort of like what we deem standard. Because I felt like if it's clinically correct, why does it matter if it's your words or somebody else's words? But he was pretty adamant that radiologists care, and he was right, because I think one of the things that radiologists have really loved about our product is that it is personalized to each radiologist. So the output they get is going to sound like them. And so that also means that, you don't feel like, one, you don't feel like you're being replaced, because it's essentially doing the work that you would have done. And to your point earlier, I don't think anybody loves doing sort of the paperwork of things, right? And that's kind of how we looked at the reporting part. It was like you can already see what's happening in the image pretty quickly, but it's the report creation. 75% of a radiologist's time, it turns out, is spent generating the report. So if we can make that part, easier, faster, more efficient, and still say the same things they would have said in their language, that sort of was, for us, was the holy grail. And so as we capture the intent of the radiologist and put it in the report, that's one part that I think is really interesting, and we're starting to do that with our RadAI reporting software that we launched last year. This year, we're starting to partner with more and more companies where they want to get into the radiology workflow, but it's been very difficult to do that historically, and we found the same challenges with some of the legacy reporting platforms. It was just really hard to integrate what you're doing. And so what we want to do is kind of build this more open ecosystem that allows folks to be able to integrate into it very easily. And it can be improvements. So for example, there are lots of, I think, useful algorithms around being able to measure nodules or any of that sort of thing where you want that in the report. But it's not just measuring the nodule, it's taking that, putting it into the report, customized to that radiologist, how they would frame, how they would put it in, and being able to capture all of that. That's where you start to create more and more value. And I do believe that over time, as we capture more and more from the image, we can start to insert that into the report, customize to that radiologist, and that is where we'll start to get them more and more leverage. So they'll be less burnt out. In fact, I just had a radiologist reach out to me the other day, and they just were able to get RadAI impressions into their radiology practice. And he told me that he finally understands what all the excitement was about. And this is like, and I've known him for about 2 years now. He said he did a shift where he did over 200 exams, and for the first time, like over the weekend, he just felt like, he wasn't as burnt out as he would have been had he not had access to it. So I think that is like a big part of it. Is this is, again, it's never for us, it's never been about replacing radiologists. It's always been about how do we augment radiologists, make them the best versions of themselves by continuing to capture sort of their special expertise and their thoughts. Because again, every radiologist is trained differently. They all have different thoughts on. In fact, just like a funny side note, we found that sometimes, when a radiologist creates a report, even if you show them the same report, maybe like 2 months later, we found that they might even disagree with themselves at times. It's kind of like, well, maybe this could be said differently. This could be done. It was like, well, this was your report from 2 months ago. Like, oh, in that case, I was probably right back then. Like, there's no new information. But I think just goes to show you there's a lot of that personalization that I think does matter. And I know lots of folks have talked about standardization and why that's important. I think there's a place for that as well. But part of it is just making it as easy as possible for radiologists to do their work, because volumes are only increasing. It feels like reimbursements are dropping generally, unless there's some changes. So it is hard to see how radiologists can continue to keep up without some technology helping. And so that's really where we want to bridge that gap and kind of be that partner for them that can help them do that.
I mean, I love that. I think there's an opinion piece on that, because there's, outside of healthcare, just a general fear that LLMs homogenize the written arts and language, right? Every single college essay is going to be some homogeneous output of some LLM that all look and feel the exact same. And yet here you're talking around, leveraging an LLM to highlight the unique qualities, differences, the special sauce, if you will, around radiologists. As a side, you should write that, because I think that is a very different way approach. But if you have data around that, I think that is absolutely special. Here, the technology is accountable to the human and not the other way around. So that actually gives me hope as I watch my son do college essays. So I digress. Jason, so Doctor kind of talks about that arc, and you think about, the brave new models coming up online and new capabilities. Like, how do we think about ways to help facilitate model building, training, management, making these things even more and more powerful, or higher utility, I should say?
Yeah, so I think for those who kind of have experience in radiology on the line, they've all seen that the majority of FDA 510K regulated models are radiology imaging based models, followed by I think, you know, cardiology, pathology, et cetera, but they're imaging based models primarily. So a lot of groups building ML models geared toward imaging. And as Doctor was so well explaining, you know, the point that you need to get to is really having a model that does really work, and it works for the radiologist, not in a way where it gets in his way or her way. You know, this is something that maybe it wasn't explicitly mentioned, but you know, myself having worked with many radiologists in the past, you know, I can tell you that, you know, they have a tremendous workload. And if you introduce some new technology to their workload, well, where you tell them, hey, this is going to operationally, you know, improve your throughput by 20% or something like that. And then they start using it and they find out that, well, actually, this is reducing my, you know, throughput by, you know, 40% or something like that. You're maybe not going to have another chance at that. Okay. You know, because reducing that throughput in that sort of a way is not something that really is worth a second chance in some cases. But getting to the point, everybody is trying to build models. Everybody's trying to go after this massive sort of a problematic operational area. What we're trying to do is really just help those, you know, be able to increase their model building throughput, give some accelerators. You know, of course, you know, we have, you know, many platform elements within Google Cloud, you know, on the actual AI building side, on the data, you know, storage, cohorting, you know, large scale data analysis. But we primarily target, you know, our services toward the builder, and being able to help them do their job and do their job better. Because we feel that if we can do that, then we can help the builders like the RadAI, you know, meet their needs faster. That's the intent.
I love that. And so Doctor, you know, you guys have been at this, the transformer. You guys were like the OG in 2018, right? Because people think that LLMs came on the scene and, you know, 20 months ago. What are you seeing just within the past 20 months in terms of scalability, latency, performance, capabilities? Are you seeing a, you know, a Moore's law, if you will, of improvement, or there's still a lot of hard computer science work ahead?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things that I've noticed, sort of, it's been a blessing and a curse in some ways, right? Because I think now there's definitely a lot more noise where it feels like now anybody can create anything, and you know, they can create a demo and it seems like it works. But the reality oftentimes is that when you start to dig under the hood a little bit or look under the hood, you realize, well, when you ask how many radiologists use it, or especially in production, not just, you know, for fun, how many use it in production, you start to get, well, nobody actually uses it yet, but like there's a promise that they might use it. And so I think that's what kind of separates a lot of it. You can't just put a wrapper around Chat GPT and then say you have a model that creates impressions. It's like a very simple, but I think obvious maybe example there that we've seen of folks saying that. So it's created a lot more noise, I would say. That's sort of been like the downside of it is, again, it just seems like anybody can create a demo. It looks legitimate, but it's oftentimes, you know, not. Now, the benefit has been that because there is so much more money, effort, time being put into this space, things have accelerated very quickly. And I think that has some pretty profound, can have profound impact over time. And I'll just give you like a simple example. When we first started working on our models back in 2018, it used to take us 12 seconds to create an impression. In 12 seconds, I mean, it's a long time. To be clear, like, you know, when we were initially showing this to radiologists, you know, we were a little worried that it was too long. They're looking at us, we're looking at them. They're looking at us like, I could have written the impression by now. Like, what's going on? And so we made so many changes. Back then, again, nobody was talking about large language models, even language models, really. And so we were sort of like pioneering a lot of the work back then. And so we were able to get it from 12 seconds down to 9 seconds, down to 7 seconds. And even as far back as this is like in 2021, it was down to like 3 seconds, and now it's less than a second. So it kind of like happens right away. But where I think it gets interesting is there is less and less that we need to do in terms of like pioneering the frameworks and infrastructure of some of this stuff. And we can spend more time focusing on the pieces that matter, right? And I think the pieces that matter, like what is sort of RadAI's unique capabilities? We have over 500 million radiology reports, right? So having that data is something that allows us to really model or tune these models in a way that'll have the best impact. So that's one piece of it. I think if you look at all the different new sort of things that are being tried, whether it's these models where, again, they're trying all sorts of different things. And now I can see a world in which you can certainly increase accuracy while also reducing inference times even further. So we're focused on leveraging our data and expertise to be able to really drive things forward. I think it'll be less about model architecture. I think people will basically use whatever models. We still use a lot of our own proprietary models for what it's worth, but we've sort of explored more and more, using some of the stuff that is more widely available. And again, it's not like you're putting a wrapper around ChatGPT, just to be clear. That's not what I'm talking about. But there are definitely newer models that are coming out that you can leverage, or even new pipelines. Like I think we've, one of the things that I've really enjoyed is in working with Google, is we initially had our own AGX servers at a data center that we managed, right? We had a lot for a relatively small startup at the time. They were very expensive. It was like buying a house at the time. Like felt like we bought a couple houses and put them in a co-location facility, is what I often referred to it as. And, once in a while they would break, like, the drivers are being updated and things would fall apart and they'd be down for a couple of days. So it was a lot of work maintaining all of that. And it would take us about a month to train a model. So from the time we received data from a customer and we cleaned it and got it to the state where it could be trained upon, it would take us a month of just training it on those DGXs to get the output. And sometimes along the way, things don't always go right. And so halfway through, you're like, wait a minute, this does not look right. Somebody, messed up on one of these, didn't turn the right knob kind of thing. And now got to start all over. So I wanted to add that context because now it's in working with Google, we've been able to now train these models in a parallel way where rather than a month, we can have it trained in hours. Because we don't need all the GPUs all the time. We just need them to be able to do the train, and then we can give them back.
Yep.
I think those types of things. So we moved our co-location facility infrastructure to Google, and that's been, I think, just a huge win for the team. We've been able to automate a lot of the pipelines for the data and training and how we do all of that with the help of Google. So I think, overall, I think that making all of that easier is good for everybody. Like, I think, I don't think it's kind of like radiologists doing the paperwork. I don't think any company is like, I want to do the infrastructure. It's like, that's not where you differentiate. You want to really allow companies like Google, where they've had a lot of experience doing it, where you sort of defer to them on that piece and work with them to make these better. So that's not for startups. That's not where you're going to differentiate.
Yeah. I know. I like it. Make it Jason's problem, and you focus on the cool, fun stuff.
Yes.
Ricardo's got a really good question actually that ties into this. The speed of models and the capabilities are coming every 15 minutes. There's yet another one. It's this, whack-a-mole. But yet there's an innovator dilemma, right? How do you could spend all your time, oh, here's a new model. Let me try this and try this and try this, as opposed to kind of incrementalism, right? Let's just get one thing going and kind of be more methodical, as opposed to kind of this frenetic feel that's right now. How are you balancing that? How are you coping with not falling prey to this ADHD model potpourri?
I mean, there are a lot of shiny objects, and this is, oftentimes true for just even deciding, what products to build. I've seen one failure mode for a lot of startups is, they try to do too many things. And if you're doing everything, you're not really doing anything. And so one of the values we have at RadAI is to prioritize with purpose. And we really take that to heart. We only work on the things where we think we can have a differentiator, and we know we're a small company, even though I feel like way bigger than it was a year ago, way bigger than it was we've been at this for almost 6 years now, but still feels like you're not gonna be able to do everything. So let's really hone in on what we think we're going to be good at and not get distracted by the other stuff. So on the models piece specifically, a lot of it is just that experimentation, right? Because nobody really knows which models are going to work well for which use cases. And I think without trying it, we oftentimes make assumptions about what we think will work well in a certain area, and we test it, and it turns out not to be true. So we have to be very careful about the bets we take. What I've found oftentimes too is because the space is moving so fast, I would not bet the farm on the research and development piece, right? Because there's just so many companies focused on that part and that are doing great work there. Unless that is sort of your core competency, I would say that's not where you're going to innovate. I think where you're going to innovate is, as a company like RadAI, we want to build products that help radiologists and transform radiology and healthcare over time. To do that, that's not just the models. The models are one piece, right? You have to be able to build software that is intuitive and people like using, and that's the part where I think RadAI has been able to accelerate our adoption, is because I think folks like using the software we build.
Jason, from your perspective, as you kind of support ISVs and companies like RadAI, is that echo true?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Being able to meet the customer where they want to be. I mean, the AI field right now, as mentioned, it's accelerating at such a pace that it's really hard for literally any one individual to keep up with. And to add on, there's the impact from the quality of the model, precision, etc. But just from a software development standpoint, honestly, any organization that I work with right now, particularly on the provider side, even some of the pharmaceutical companies, not one of them do the age-old, sort of implementation thing where they take the whole stack of a model and replace their whole kind of imaging workflow around that model any longer. From a software side, you absolutely have to think abstraction. How are you interfacing with this model? What part of its workflow are you using it for? Can there be an API surface, even a schema that's going to be standardized around how that's integrated in that environment? We're talking, around radiology reporting a lot here, but on the diagnostic interpretation side, how the images get there, in many cases, models are used to enhance that workflow depending on the procedure. I mean, I've worked with providers who have 100+ diagnostic imaging models in production at any moment. So orchestration, having facades and API layers and abstractions in place that allow you to be able to plug in new models in a way where you can test them out, I think that's where you have to be now.
No, that's sorry about that. So we have a question on the Q&A, again, kind of talking about workflow is king, and maybe Doctor, you have some other examples of bucking the trend. It's super sexy to create the incidentaloma magical image AI solution that is a lot of show and tell, and it sounds cool, but yet doesn't meet the mark in terms of kind of true workflow value creation, and ultimately how do we reinforce the autonomy of the radiologist or the pathologist. I'm just curious, as you look at that space, what are other examples, and maybe you don't want to share that because that's the special sauce for you all, but are there other kind of examples where you see not going after the image per se is an example of that.
Yeah, it's kind and it's funny, having done 5 startups now, I wish, I mean, if it was just as easy as giving away an idea, oftentimes it's the execution that matters. The ideas, I don't want to say they're cheap, but the ideas are not sort of the main thing. I think oftentimes, like, you have to be able to deliver on and execute on the ideas. So some other examples that we've seen is, again, lots of great folks that are building algorithms that could have some meaningful impact within the radiology workflow, but they have no way to get into the workflow. And so we've even looked at around some of the billing improvements that could be made at the time the radiologist is creating the report. If you can, let them know, like, these are the words, because sometimes it's just a difference in phrasing that makes all the difference between it being, and what happens is it goes to billing and then has to go back to the radiologist. That it's just, the whole process is a bit of a mess. But if you can catch that before the radiologist signs off on it, then I think it sort of helps everybody, reduces that need to go back and fix it later. So there are interesting opportunities there with our open platform. We want to be able to empower companies like that want to integrate into the workflow. That's one. There are other ones around, again, like measurements. There are even ones where maybe it is almost like a second look type of feature where, you have just giving radiologists a peace of mind that, the AI is not helping them initially diagnose anything, but at least there's an opportunity for something to, like, look at it after the fact and say, hey, we think there might be this thing, and they could just take a second look. I think those are all things that would be a net benefit. And the other thing to keep in mind too, while we're heavily focused on the US, we do want to also think about the international markets as well, because there's just a shortage of radiologists around the world. And, there's a lack of access to radiology around the world. And if we can make it easier to get access to radiology and make it easier in those ways. There are lots of ways in places where they have no radiologists, right, where you can help in those ways. So I think the billing is a good example. Measurements are a good example, but we'll announce this, I think prior to RSNA this year, but we're partnering with a lot of companies, really anyone that wants to be part of the reporting workflow will be able to integrate into our system. And it's going to be open. And maybe one bit of context that might be helpful here. The original architect of our radiology reporting software, it's a problem that he has thought about and worked on for over 15 years. This is not something where we just woke up one morning and we're like, maybe we should get into reporting. This is not how it happened. In fact, it took a little bit of convincing for me to get on board with this, because it felt like it is such a large undertaking. And I'm sure you both know, like, all these things sound easy, but then when you start actually getting into it, turns out, I mean, the legacy reporting platforms, I mean, they were built over the span of 15 years. There are all these bells and whistles and little things that not every customer uses, but some of them use, and you have to, like, get parity with a lot of that to make it work. And so one of the folks on our team, like, he's been thinking about it for such a long time, but the one thing he felt like if he could do it all over again, he would want to make it this open system that makes it not just sort of like easy to integrate. Again, like, we're trying to use very modern standards like FHIR and some of this other stuff to, like, help move the industry forward. And he's very much like an advocate of standards-based connectivity. And so he could talk for hours and days. Yeah, same with Jason. So but I think that's what you need to really move healthcare forward. If you can make this sort of interoperability easy, then I think we'll get much more innovation much more quickly. But that typically has not happened because, it's sort of some of the incumbents, it's just not, that's not been their priority, I would say. And so it's just not really flourished.
I wish you guys would write an EHR, because that kind of mindset of a platform base that, where certain groups don't have all of the answers or ideas, and we're better together, certainly would change everything clinically. I actually want to touch a little bit about kind of where you see the report. Impression is one thing for the radiologist, great, it's done, but out of that, there's a whole bunch of assets as a hospitalist. I look at that information, or worse, I read it, but I don't follow up, right? I get a little piece of information, but that little incidentaloma that the primary care physician, or perhaps it's something that actually the patient needs, and I want to have the patient, read that and be accountable and aware and empowered. How are you thinking? Is that kind of along that arc of, we don't want to own everything, but we want to create a extensible framework in which, hey, another services company could take the incidentaloma workflow, another quality reporting person could take this, CRO could do that. Is that kind of how you're thinking about that framework?
Yes, that's a good way to articulate it. So we do have a product which is called Continuity, our RadAI Continuity product, which essentially helps with the follow-up management piece of it for incidental findings. And we found that, and this was sort of driven more by our partners and customers. We found that Cone Health was someone we were working with, and this was a big sort of area of need for them. And so they said, hey, if you could help us with this, maybe, it would be something that could be interesting for you all. And so again, we did not take this lightly, but we felt like if there's something we could do here that would be helpful, we wanted to try. And so with Cone, I think we took their follow-up rates from 30% to over 90%. So very meaningful change there. And it's good for patients, right? Because those patients that otherwise would not have received the follow-up now all of a sudden got the follow-up, because otherwise, there's so many stories of radiologists that I've spoken to where they're just it's like, if we could save all these folks, it's almost like curing a disease, right? You could probably save tens of thousands of lives a year if everyone were sort of adopting this ability to do that. And so something that was operable is no longer operable if they come in too late, so things like that. So that's one piece of it. The other one is it reduces liability for the health system, right? I mean, that's like the other thing that they're thinking about. And, it's also something that it has a good ROI. It pays for itself, right? Patients are coming back into their network to get additional imaging work done. So it's like a win-win-win. There's really not a lot of downside. It's just oftentimes getting it to be the priority for health systems can be a challenge. But outside of that, I think we found that's also something where we want to be able to plug things in and find the best ways to make it useful and valuable for our partners. So hopefully that kind of helps address it.
No, I love it. And we're, of course, coming up on time, but I'll give each of you kind of the last word. Jason, what excites you? What wakes you up in the morning, and what keeps you up at night in this exciting space? What's real, and where do you see the puck going?
Oh, well, having been in this industry for a very long time right now, I can tell you that, if nothing else, AI is forcing the industry to make change, honestly. There's real impact that it's making right now. We need to find the good balance, on how to make that happen. It's here to stay. We just need to find that, perfect balance between these two worlds. That's what massively excites me, being, a very, very, very tech heavy person. Anybody speaking to me knows I love going into the weeds on these conversations. And yeah, with respect to where it's going, frankly, I think diagnostic radiology and all the sort of imaging modalities and enterprise imaging, the world is changing. And we need to figure out, how to make sure that sort of enterprise architecture can kind of benefit from the way in which technology is changing. And that's what I love doing. So, yeah.
And Dr.
Yeah, I think, the thing that I get most excited about is really this opportunity for all these things to be working together collaboratively. One of the key things at RadAI as a culture is collaboration. And so I also apply that oftentimes when we're thinking about the industry. We want to work with as many different partners as we can to sort of bring to forth whatever value they can bring into it. And so the more ideas we have, the more partners we have, the more we're working together, whether it's with PACS companies, that's another example. We're working with a lot of PACS companies now that want to be able to finally get some of what they're doing into the report and pull things out of the report. But the thing that I think, that part is really exciting. And I think just being able to reduce some of the the burnout for radiologists and increasing access. Those are kind of the things that are, my name being doctor, it's always a little bit funny, right? Because some folks are like, oh, maybe you were destined to be in healthcare one day. And some of that I think is just because I do feel like there's, of all the industries, like we're in one where we can positively impact the lives of patients. I get excited about that. And I think our entire team is very mission driven. So, but if anybody out there is thinking about, that wants to get into the radiology workflow, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to hear from folks, if whether I could be helpful on even just on the startup side, right, where I help advise companies that are early stage to figure out like what is sort of the right opportunity market to go after, how to fundraise, any of that. If I'm able to be helpful, I always like to try to pay it forward to the extent that I can.
Well, I think that's a perfect conclusion. I know there's a couple questions on the Q&A, and some of them are really, really meaty around interoperability with PACS that has Jason salivating. And so we'll make sure we write up some of those Q&As, so we're not giving you short change. But we'll make sure that we address those. One formality, we have one last camp. It's so sad because summer is winding down, but we're going to be talking about kind of research and the need for collaboration and data science, synthetic data, and all of those things that round out a spectacular summer. But with that, I really want to thank Doktor and Jason. I thought the closing remarks from Doktor around, this is around a team sport. This is sharing shamelessly. This is learning from each other, which I think is true to having an open, extensible framework. We are better together. I think anyone who thinks that they've solved something independent of a real diverse audience and understanding workflow is probably building Theranos. This is a real collaborative, intentional, and teamwork approach. And then lastly, the purpose of camp is to make camp friends. And so we will have email, we will have the video recording. This is not intended to be a one and done, but to build a true sense of community and collaboration, regardless of the color and logo on your badge. We are all passionate around healthcare. We are all here to help others. And so with that, the spirit is education, collaboration, and community. So thank you. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. And again, thank you very much to my two guests. Thank you.
Awesome. Pleasure. Have a great one, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.